Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, December 1st. This is day 56. The news that I heard last night before going to bed and that I woke up to this morning, of course, that I'm sure most of you, if not all, have heard, is that the temporary pauses have ended and that there has been ongoing violence. I'll tell you some of the different pieces between Jerusalem and West Bank, and the bombing of Gaza has resumed. And so the statistics we're hearing is that more than 100 people were killed. And we don't know the exact numbers, but more than 100 people in less than 24 hours. In terms of the resumption, I don't know if that's the word, in terms of the bombing of Gaza. It's hard to even give an update. CMEP's working on a statement. It'll come out tomorrow saying that a ceasefire is the only way forward to prevent mass killing, further death and destruction. And the killing is not limited to civilians in Gaza. I've given statistics in the past week or so about the number of Palestinians who've been killed in the West Bank. One of the worst incursions by the Israeli military into Jenin, at the refugee camp there, happened in the last few days. There was a video online. I might have talked about this some in the last day or so, but there was a video online, and I watched it this morning, of two young boys. One was 8 or 9 or 10. Different news reports are saying different ages. I think the other child was 15. And you can literally watch them in the street just being shot on the video. So that raid on the Jenin refugee camp is supposed to have been, I was watching a news report, one of the deadliest to have happened in a long time. There was news that in Jerusalem, a Palestinian gunman killed 3 Israelis and another 16 were injured when they opened fire at a bus stop in Jerusalem. The gunmen were shot and killed by off-duty soldiers, and I think I heard by a settler, but by an off-duty soldiers in the area, and Hamas claimed responsibility for that attack. And all of that was kind of my understanding right before the ceasefire ended. We're told that the ceasefire fell through because of issues with the exchange of hostages. And reports are saying that Qatar and others are still trying to return to the negotiating table in regard to the hostages, but there's not been progress in that regard. For me, the big news, or what's really the most devastating, is that the United States government has been saying, Secretary Blinken, President Biden, the Biden administration, and this has come from Blinken himself and from President Biden, they've been saying that this portion of the Israeli war will look differently, that now civilians will be protected. Now Israel, they are going to hold Israel to account. And I had direct conversations with them about this. They've been saying this publicly. And what we're witnessing in the first 24 plus hours, of the bombing campaign resuming, is that that's just not the case. I woke up to a text this morning from Gaza saying, that the bombing was no different than it had been previously. And some are saying that there are places where it's even worse than it was before. All of the death and all of the violence, from Jenin to the Israelis that were killed in Jerusalem to the civilians in Gaza, all of it is horrific. And a ceasefire does not mean Hamas, takes over Gaza. A ceasefire means Hamas stops the violence. It means Israel stops the violence, and it means non-violent means are pursued. Non-violent diplomatic negotiating means are the way then to resolve conflict, to resolve decisions about which governing authorities should be in place. And as you've seen with the hostages, those involved in the negotiations are Israelis, they're Palestinians. I mean, the PA has not been involved in the hostages directly, but, Hamas obviously has been, but Qatar has been involved, the United States, Egypt. There have been a lot of players around the table. And so the death toll upon civilians is just devastating. I'm getting texts from Palestinians in the West Bank, and I have not checked in yet with anyone in Israel, but I was speaking to a Jewish American. The ongoing cycle of violence is just devastating. It's just devastating. So I wrote a letter to the White House, and I thought I would just read to you a little bit of what I wrote. I said, of course, we're all aware of the sequences of the events of the past few days, from the death of the young boys in the West Bank to the killings in Jerusalem claimed by Hamas, and now the resumption of the bombing again in Gaza. All of these deaths are horrific. Only an end to the violence and diplomatic solutions in the context of a comprehensive ceasefire are the answer for Israelis and for Palestinians. We heard from you directly, this is speaking to the Biden administration just a few days ago, and of course from Secretary Blinken and President Biden, that in this next go-around, the U.S. has issued an imperative that Israel avert civilian deaths and, quote, a premium be put on protecting civilians, end quote. I am not I can't pronounce that word, a statistician. I'm not an expert on war. But from what I'm hearing from Gaza, there is no difference in Israel's tactics. We're hearing already that dozens are dead in just a few hours. What is the White House doing to ensure that civilians in Gaza are protected now that the bombing campaign has resumed? I woke up this morning to a message from this leader in Gaza. This person's a Palestinian moderate committed to peace, and I thought you should hear his words directly from Khan Yunis. Hopes were high for an extended truce, with some optimistic about a longer-term ceasefire. The decisive directive from the United States urged restraint as Israel resumed operations and progressed into the southern Gaza Strip. These entities are the ones that ordered Gazan residents to be relocated to what they labeled as safe areas in the south. There is no safe place. These same entities alleged that hospitals served as command centers for militants, justifying their destruction, and even justifying when there was no power for incubators for premature babies. Despite a daily death toll exceeding 370 innocent civilians, mostly children, they persist in labeling these actions as self-defense. The sole distinction between today and 55 days ago lies in the nature of the authorization granted. Initially, it was an unrestricted approval for the actions such as killing, massacring, destroying, invading, and besieging 2.3 million people. The current authorization essentially permits a continuation of these actions with the aim to conclude it before Christmas. The message was received and the executions have started. At least 30 people have died in less than 4 hours. How hypocritical to grieve the death of children on October 7th and then to prepare for Christmas celebrations without being disturbed at all by the images of killed Palestinian children. Blood is on the hands of the hypocrites at the White House. End quote. And I continued in my letter, does the White House not know how out of touch and shameful it seems to be that this year's holiday theme is magic, wonder, and joy? The First Lady's statement that the theme of the year is inspired by how children experience this festive season, completely present. This is a quote from the news, completely present in the beauty and bounty around them, their senses alight, with hearts open to magic, wonder, and joy of the holidays. That's a statement by our First Lady, that children's hearts are open to magic, wonder, and joy during the holidays. I am appalled. Children in Gaza are dying every day, and the U.S. has the power to stop it. And if President Biden and the First Lady truly care about children, please implore them to protect children in Israel, to protect any children that might still be held hostage. I haven't heard if all the children have been released, any children in the West Bank, and to not ignore the children in Gaza who are suffering so much in the midst of Israel's war. I sent also to the White House a letter that we published just in the last couple of days, a global letter that Religious News Services, we released it on Religious News Services 68. It was 69, but 68 bishops from around the world addressed a letter to President Biden calling for a ceasefire. There were leaders from South Africa, from Europe, from the UK, from the United States. We also put out a press statement yesterday or someday recently about the visit of the Palestinian Christians from Bethlehem and Jerusalem in Washington, D.C. And I'm appalled at the actions of our country. And I implore Christians and people of faith for us to extend love and not hatred, for us to work against vitriolic hatred, for us to work against any actions that cause harm, but for us to seek to end violence and war and to call for a ceasefire in the midst of this utter devastation.